This is a picture I love of my grandma in her kitchen. Isn't she the cutest? I wanted to show you that picture of my grandma because the recipe I'm sharing today is a recipe that I have a connection with that grandma. That's my grandma Hilda, and the recipe I'm sharing with you is for my sourdough bread, and my sourdough start is actually named after that grandma Hilda. A lot of people name their sourdough start. I named mine after Grandma Hilda. Let me tell you why. When we went to Oregon once to visit that grandma, we didn't get to see them very often, but when we went one time, I have a vivid memory of going into her house and it smelling like fresh baked bread. We'd just driven, I think, 8+ hours to go and visit them. And so after a long car ride, I think that was some of the best bread I've ever tasted. And my mom also made homemade bread a lot when I was growing up. I have to admit, I didn't follow in their footsteps earlier in my life. My kids had a lot of store-bought bread, but now that I have this sourdough start and love the results from making bread with it, I rarely buy store-bought bread anymore. I make this sourdough bread on Sundays a lot for our family. And you know, if you've looked at other videos, you'll see that I had a recipe for sourdough pancakes also. So sometimes I make things other than bread, but most of the time I use it to make bread. I love this recipe because it uses simple ingredients that I always have on hand. All you have to make this bread is flour, water, salt, and your sourdough start. If you live around me and don't have a start, let me know and I can feed mine and give you part of this. My neighbor that gave me this start originally that I started using had gotten it from her mother, who had gotten it from her grandmother. It was originally started in the 1950s. So the original start that mine stemmed from is older than I am. So that's why this reminded me of my grandma, because it came from my neighbor's grandma, and because I have a vivid memory of my grandma making bread for us when we went to visit her. The night before you want to make sourdough bread, you want to feed your starter. It will have hooch on the top, a liquid on the top. You pour that off and then mix your starter with 1 cup of water that's room temperature water, and you will whisk that together until it is smooth. Once that is smooth, then you add in 1 cup of flour. Once you've added the flour, you want to stir it together and try to get the lumps out the best that you can, but don't overwork it too much. Remember, your sourdough start is like a leavening, and you don't want to kill that leavening in starter. So I know it looks like I'm stirring fast here, but I'm not really. The video's just fast forwarded. Once you have the sourdough start fairly smooth, cover it loosely and let it set overnight. The next morning, your starter should be bubbly, kind of like this. And then you'll take 1/2 cup, put it back in your container, put it in the refrigerator to save for future use. That's your start you always keep. The rest of the sourdough start you can use for your recipe. To your sourdough start, you're going to add your water, 250 grams of water. You'll notice that I'm using a kitchen scale. That helps it so my measurements are accurate. And then you will add in 500 grams of flour and stir that lightly until it's just incorporated. Don't stir too much, just lightly until it's incorporated. And then you will let that set for 20 minutes. While that's sitting, you can measure out your other ingredients that you would like to add to it. The salt, I add about 10 to 15 grams of salt. And we love the garlic seasoning and rosemary to put in our bread. You can add all kinds of things, jalapeno, cheese, sautéed onions, whatever you would like. As that is kneading, you'll let it knead for 10 minutes and add flour as needed to make sure that the dough pulls away from the edge of the bowl and forms around the dough hook. You don't want to add too much flour because the less flour you use, the more light and fluffy it will be, but you do want it to be nice and smooth and to be formed around the dough hook. Once that has happened, you can put it in wherever you want it to proof or raise. I like to use my Instant Pot to raise dough and proof it. It helps speed up the process a little bit. About 30-45 minutes into the proofing, you want to stretch your dough. So you'll take it out of the pan and fold it in thirds, fold it over itself and form it back into a ball. and then put it back to let it raise longer. When your dough's done rising, turn it onto a floured surface and then form it into the loaves that you want. I like to make it into 2 loaves, and I usually make it like French bread style, but you could make 1 big loaf if you would like to, whatever you prefer. And then you will let that proof or rise again until it's about doubled in size. I use my oven on the proof setting. Once it has risen, you will score the loaves and let them set while you preheat the oven. You'll bake the bread at 450 degrees. After your bread has baked for 12 minutes at 450 degrees, you will reduce your heat in your oven to 400 degrees and continue to bake your bread until it has an internal temperature of about 195 to 200 degrees until it's a nice golden brown color that you like. The recipe recommends that you let the bread cool for 1 hour before you cut it and start eating, but we don't have much luck waiting that long at our house. This is a video of my granddaughter who knew I had taken the bread out of the oven in front of it begging, "Bite, a bite, bite."